Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Andrew de la Cruz, and I will be your moderator for today. So welcome to our very first roundtable discussion on COP26. So today's dialogue will be about COP26, what's new about it, and why is there a need for such conference when we already have the Paris Agreement from 7 years ago. So to answer the guide questions that I will be raising later, we have invited guests from the Foreign Service Program of the Lyceum of the Philippines University Cavite campus. So our guests is Ms. Hae Carbonel, Ms. Micaela Bisagas, Ms. Zarah Frias, and Ms. Jovelyn Gueco. So without further ado, let's answer the first question. Okay. Okay. So what do you know about COP26? May I call Ms. Hae first to answer this question?
Okay. Good day, everyone. Again, my name is Hae Maureen Carbonel. I am a fourth-year foreign service student from the Lyceum of the Philippines University Cavite. And to start with, COP26 is anchored with the Paris Agreement. So Paris Agreement is an international treaty whose aim is to lessen the increase of the global average temperature to as much as 2%. And it has a practical goal of maintaining a 1.5 increase throughout the years. And the key point of COP26 and its difference from other COPs or COPs is that by this time, it's bound to be more on the performative side rather than be stuck on the promise phase. So how about you, Ms. Mica?
First of all, a pleasant day to everyone. COP26, from its name, is the 26th Climate Change Conference of the Parties, which took place last October 31 to November 12, 2021, and was hosted by the United Kingdom in partnership with Italy. So basically, just like other conferences of the parties, it aims to address the long-standing issue on climate change and other environmental problems like the increasing global warming, which the UN Secretary General refers to as the quote and unquote code red for humanity, especially after the recent reports made by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So among its goal is to require countries to submit their improved NDCs or nationally determined contributions for 2030. What about you, Ms. Frias?
So as for me, I honestly have a very shallow background about it. So as to what I know, it is simply a movement in order to eliminate or fight climate change under the 2021 United Nations Conference. That's all. What about you, Ms. Gueco?
So good afternoon, everyone. So to sum it up, it is all about the world being united to tackle climate change. COP26 brought parties all together to make action to achieve the goals of Paris Agreement. That's all.
Thank you, speakers, for that backgrounder about COP26. Now we proceed to the next question. How are top emitting countries, especially China, US, Germany, and Russia, are stepping up in this conference of parties? Can you answer first, Miss Mica?
So basically, these countries released pledges, one of them being the Global Methane Pledge, which has the goal of lessening the emitted greenhouse gases by at least 30% from the recorded emitted greenhouse gases last 2020. So this is aimed to be achieved by 2030. So this was launched by 24 countries, including, of course, the United States. And by 2050, they also aim to completely phase out the use of coal and gas and instead utilize environmental friendly and renewable resources like wind and solar energy in order to achieve the goal of slowing down the global warming. That's all.
How about you, Miss Jovelyn?
So to provide two sides, here are the top emitter and the most vulnerable countries. So first is the China. We all know that China is the world's top carbon emitter, and they are facing the impacts of climate change, such as extreme rainfall that destroyed the province of Henan. So President Xi Jinping first planned for an emissions peak in 2013 and carbon neutrality by 2060. Second, he also promised to discontinue funding coal projects overseas. And lastly, he promised to start cutting its own coal consumption in 2026. On the other hand, the LCDCs, or the least developing countries, it represents the 46 poorest countries across Asia Pacific and Africa. So they are the most vulnerable to climate changes, even if they are the least responsible for causing it. So LDCs are expected to push the wealthy countries or the developed countries to provide $100 billion per year for climate finance to the developing countries for 2020 to 2024. So that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Jovelyn. How about you, Ms. Kay? How do you think these top emitting countries are stepping up?
Well, I agree with both Mica and Jovelyn on their statements that there is such a need for international cooperation with regards to this one, especially on the emissions trading bound by multilateral agreements and other diplomatic ties. However, the agenda of COP26 is to basically align itself to the goal of focusing on the national climate change plans and transitioning to a more eco-friendly way of living, a sustainable one, if I may say, through its NDC, or the Nationally Determined Contributions, which was mentioned earlier by Mica. One prominent goal of the conference was to emit the use of coal. And yung sinabi ni Jovi kanina na plans ng China, it was merely a plan up until this point of time kasi they haven't submitted the final proposal for this national determined contributions. So in all honesty, the challenge in achieving this goal is the commitment and credibility of each nation to its national goal, just like what I've mentioned in China. So most of the time, those who are causing and those who are greatly affected are very different facets or very different parts of the world. For example, the top emitting countries, those who contribute much on the global warming and the climate change in general, are also those countries who are much equipped in facing the consequences of the issues. Unlike those parts of the global south or those underdeveloped or developing countries who, in an obvious way, contributes less in the transcending conditions of the environment, but gets the most backlash without having the same capacity to adapt to the changes in the ecosystem and transition to a more sustainable living. And again, obviously, because of the already existing development gaps between the global north and the global south. So I think these top emitting countries are performing well, if I may say again, well, for their benefit, but not for the benefit of the world. So that's all.
How about you, Ms. Zarah? What can you say about this one?
So in contrast to what they said, I guess these top emitting countries are stepping up with their plans when their plans are being updated with the transparent reporting, together with their connections in strengthening engagement with other countries as well. That would be all.
Well, it is true that transparency is the key in collaborating in COP26. However, as Ms. Hay said, it is true that some of these top emitting countries, since they are so powerful, they are actually using their power to act upon only for themselves, but not for the benefit of all or of the whole planet. Okay, now we proceed to the next question. So the question is, isn't it too late for COP26? We've already felt the consequences of climate change. So isn't it too late for us for the COP26 to happen or to occur? What can you say about this, Ms. Zarah?
So for me, there's no such thing as too late in fighting climate change. What's important is it started, and at the same time, I guess, in line with the Paris Agreement, this only supports it in a way. That's all.
How about you, Ms. Jovelyn? What can you say about this? Isn't it too late for COP26?
So for me, it is not yet too late, but we have to act now. So COP26 should focus on their main goal since they are being off track in keeping the temperature below 2 degrees Celsius and commit to a goal of 1.5. So we are still hoping that countries promise to take measures about number one, cut back on fossil fuels, number two, invest in renewable energy sources, number three, provide assistance to developing countries will make into action. That's all.
How about you, Ms. Hay?
Okay. For me, I believe that it's never too late for the citizens of the world to take action, just like the COP26. But I'd like to put an emphasis on the fact that we are totally behind its goals and the world has evidently fallen short on its ambitions.
And Miss Mica?
Well, the only thing that I can say is that there's nothing wrong in holding conferences about climate change, especially since it's a really pressing issue that will continue to linger due to rapid innovation and developments in the society. But if we just continue to hold conferences and enter agreements and then do not put them into action, then these conferences do not really make sense at all. And who knows, maybe in the future, it's already too late to do something about the climate change crisis that we are currently experiencing. That's all.
Thank you so much for that. It is true that it is better late than never, right? So as we proceed to the next question, is COP26 a success or a failure? What can you say about this, Ms. Jovelyn? Can you go first?
So for me, the answer is yes, it fell short. The world is off track and falling short for keeping their two main goals, which are renewing targets for 2030 that links warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and an agreement on accelerating the phase out of coal. So as based to climate activist Greta, she labeled COP26 as a global North greenwash festival. As for her, the two-week summit was merely a noise. So I think this is an indicator that there are no more time to lose. What do you think, Hey?
Well, if you are to ask me is if COP26 a success or a failure, to be honest, I don't have any capacity to assess this one. So I'd like to cite those who are professional in the field or those who are actually doing their part on this problem. So as per the United Nations Secretary General, he mentioned that we are still holding on the 1.5 goal, although it's a hard fight to win. And with that, I can say that it's neither a success nor a failure at this point. But I'd like to acknowledge again that effort is an effort, but it hasn't materialized well since then.
How about you, Ms. Zara? What can you say about this? Is it a success or a failure?
So in contrast to Ms. Gueco and Ms. Carbonel, COP26 for me is somehow a success where declarations are made to help people directly, and since voices are heard by all the parties in the negotiations as well. So what about you, Ms. Bisagas?
Well, I must say, I have to side with Miss Carbonell and Miss Gueco for this one because for me, COP26 has its own share of shortcomings because what happens is that world leaders are willing to take large pledges, but no one's actually initiating to do the first step. So it's indeed gonna be a failure if it's just going to remain on paper. So just like what climate activist Vanessa Nakate stated, we are drowning in promises and we don't need any more promises. We need these ideas, these pledges to be implemented as soon as possible. On a brighter note, we're both excited and intrigued where it's headed. That's all.
Wow, interesting answers from our speakers, right? Some of them agrees that it is a success, and some of them actually think it's a failure, and some of them don't know yet whether it's a success or failure. What we can do now is to wait for the result if it'll be a success or somehow a failure. Proceeding to the last question, is global conference enough to stop the issues of climate change? Can you answer first, Miss Zara?
So I would say that a conference is not enough, but it is a way to stop global issue. An actual action afterward is needed. Being in a conference may bring up a lot of issues like the finances. It will be easier to do an actual work by assessing what's been discussed during the conference. So what about you, Ms. Gueco?
So to quote the statement of UN Nations Secretary General Antonio, It is an important step, but not enough. So words without actions is merely a bluff. That's all.
How about you, Miss Mica? What can you say about this?
So just like what everyone else stated earlier, there's nothing wrong with it. So as long as they are being taken into action, because a mere conference wouldn't solve the climate crisis that we are currently experiencing if no one's willing to move, especially considering that it'll always be the developing countries like the Philippines who are greatly affected by it. That's all.
And lastly, how about you, Miss Hae?
Okay, so for my take on this question, although I have mentioned earlier that this effort is somehow failing to achieve its goals, I'd like to give credit to these global conferences for providing platforms for people in other countries who holds massive desire to show up and be part of the solution. So indeed, we need more of the nature-based solutions, such as the restoration and protection of the ecosystems that are significant in minimizing the impact of climate change. For example, you mentioned earlier that those top emitting countries are also, I've mentioned earlier that those top emitting countries are also those who are kind of making ways into making it a more manageable or a more livable, a sustainable world. So for example, UK, their prime minister is fond of using the phrase coal, cash, cars, and trees. So what are these four words? For the coals, it is kind of expected that wealthy nations will no longer use coal by the end of this decade, and underdeveloped countries will have done so by the end of this century. For the cars, electric powered cars should be the future of the transportation for the whole world, and government should stop using the internal combustion engines. For the cash, these top emitting countries, or let's just say these big countries, should honor their $100 billion, if I may say, promise to solve this climate finance problem. And lastly, for the trees, governments must conserve the environment and put a stop to the massacre of trees, according to the words of their prime minister. So I think everyone should make major commitments individually and collectively in four areas, which are the climate change, of course, into sustainable livelihoods, basic amenities, and the resource consumption. So that would be all.
Interesting insights, Miss Hae. Thank you again to everyone, to our speakers, to Miss Hae, to Miss Mica, to Miss Zarah, and to Miss Jovelyn for the wonderful discourse that we have done this afternoon. Again, and thank you again to our audiences for staying with us and until the end of this roundtable discussion. We hope that you have a lot of things that you have learned from this dialogue. And we encourage everyone to spread the word, share it with your friends, your family members. And we'll leave you a question. What do you think we can do more about this climate issues that we are experiencing right now? What do you think we can do aside from having conference of parties? What do you think you can do to take part or um, to be one with us in this climate action? Again, thank you for everyone. Thank you, Ms. Hae. Thank you, Ms. Mica. Thank you, Ms. Zara. Thank you, Ms. Jovelyn, again for this wonderful discourse. And see you all again next time. Thank you so much, everyone.